Almost every athlete in America is making huge mistakes with their breathing, and it's killing their performance. And it's not just any athlete, even elite athletes are making these same mistakes with their breathing. So what if I told you there's a way to quickly double your performance, but also use less effort? You can do this by simply changing your breathing. Most people spend a lot of time focusing on different things like their diet or different workout plans and all these other things to improve their performance, but hardly anyone focuses on their breathing. But I can tell you right now, if you do not focus on your breathing, you will never achieve your maximum fitness because it's impossible. And the reason is right now, most people are breathing wrong. Nowadays, most people are breathing way more than their body actually needs. And you may think that breathing more is fine because now you're getting more oxygen to your lungs, so this may be good. But actually, breathing more is a sign that you are unhealthy. So let's give a little example. Let's say there's two people, and one of them is a track athlete, and one of them is just an obese person. And you ask both of them to climb a set of stairs and carry some luggage. Which one of them would you expect to be huffing and puffing and out of breath? Obviously not the track athlete, right? The obese person. And this is the problem. It's called chronically over-breathing. And this is one of the biggest obstacles to anyone's health and their fitness. Now, here's the thing. We used to be breathing correctly. It was only recently where our breathing really started to change. Our breathing started to change in the last 1,000 years. And it really started quickly changing in the last 300 years. And the reason our breathing has changed so rapidly is not because of genetics. It's because there have been so many drastic changes to our environment in such a small amount of time. We have started living more comfortably. We have stopped exercising so much. So in other words, we've gotten way more lazy. And we've also started eating a lot more unhealthy. On the other hand, our ancestors would eat very differently and basically do their day-to-day functions way more differently than us. They would hunt for their food. So every day they would be exercising and working out. And they would also eat a lot more natural and raw foods, unlike us. As a result, our ancestors breathed way differently and they breathed way more efficiently than we do now. You can imagine if you were sitting on a couch and already breathing way too excessively and you try to get up and go for a run, it's going to be really hard because you're already going to put yourself at a disadvantage. On the other hand, if someone is constantly breathing very little and they don't need to breathe that much because they're in good shape, they are going to be at a much higher advantage than you because their body does not need as much oxygen as you. And just to give another example, there are people now that still breathe correctly and breathe like our ancestors did. So just to give one example, there's a tribe in northern Mexico called the Tarahumara tribe. So this is a running tribe, and people actually studied their heart rates while they ran a marathon. So over the 26-mile journey, they tracked their heart rates, and their average heart rate was 130 beats per minute. Now, at the same time, they tracked westernized marathon runners, and during their marathons, their average heart rate was 160 to 180 beats per minute. So what is the difference here? How come that tribe in northern Mexico, their heart rate was way lower than the heart rate in westernized areas? Well, the answer is not that they're more physically gifted. The answer is simply how they breathe. Instead of huffing and puffing and breathing through their mouth, they're able to breathe a lot less. Now, this is not just the difference with that one tribe. This is how our ancestors used to breathe. Our ancestors used to only use their nose to breathe during physical exercise. They would use their mouths as a last resort. And this is how modern hunter-gathering tribes still breathe. And this is what we as westernized society have gotten away from. And this is how our breathing has changed so rapidly. So I'm going to go over ways from a medical perspective to actually improve your breathing and improve your athletic performance. Now, you don't have to be an athlete to do some of these techniques. Anyone can benefit from breathing less and doing these techniques because it's not just going to improve your athletic performance, it's also going to improve your overall health. One of the biggest mistakes people make when they start feeling out of breath is they start taking these big gulps of air through their mouth. But the problem is, this is not fixing the problem. It's actually making the problem worse. It would be better to start slowing your breathing down and to start using your nose to breathe whenever you start to feel breathless. What you got to understand is, first of all, why do you feel the need to take that big breath in the first place? Why are you feeling so breathless in the first place? The reason is you need to deliver more oxygen to your cells. Now, that's a key word here. It's not delivering more oxygen to your lungs. You already have enough oxygen in your lungs. Instead, when you're feeling breathless, you need to deliver more oxygen to all the organs in your body. Now, the reason that you're feeling out of breath and the reason that this oxygen is not getting delivered to your cells is because you're breathing too excessively. You're breathing too much in the first place. Now, this is true for pretty much any scenario unless you have some sort of lung condition like COPD or something like that. That might be something else going on. But you can even test this. You can take a pulse oximeter, and that's basically something that goes over your finger and that measures your oxygen saturation. In other words, that measures how much oxygen is attached to the hemoglobin in your lungs. Basically, what happens is when you breathe in oxygen, and this oxygen will attach to a molecule called hemoglobin. Now, your hemoglobin is basically a train, and this train will carry this oxygen to all of the different cells in your body. So your oxygen is basically a passenger, and it'll board this train, and this train will go to all the different cells. It'll go to your brain, it'll go to your heart, it'll go all to different organs, and this is how all of your different organs and all of your different cells will receive their oxygen. So this hemoglobin is very important. And this pulse oximeter that you put on your finger and measures your oxygen saturation measures how much oxygen is attached to this hemoglobin. So if a lot of this oxygen is attached to this hemoglobin molecule, then you're going to have a really high oxygen saturation. And most people will have a really high oxygen saturation. Again, unless you have some sort of lung condition or something else going on. So most people will have an oxygen saturation of between 95 to 99 or 100%. That's a pretty good oxygen saturation level. So if you're breathing through your mouth and you check your oxygen levels with this pulse oximeter, it should be pretty high because you're getting plenty of oxygen through your mouth, and that oxygen is going to your lungs, and your hemoglobin is getting flooded with all this oxygen. Now, if you switch over to breathing through your nose, you're still going to have a pretty high oxygen saturation. Actually, it won't change because still your body's going to get flooded with all this oxygen, and you're going to have enough oxygen to flood all of that hemoglobin, and your oxygen saturation will still be high. So that's not the issue here. The issue is not getting that oxygen from the air around you to go into your lungs and get attached to that molecule. The issue becomes when that hemoglobin has to deliver that oxygen to your cells, because that hemoglobin sometimes does not drop off that oxygen to your cells. Sometimes it'll stay attached to that oxygen, and in turn, your cells or your brain or your heart or your different organs will not get that oxygen. And then your cells will start to starve. And this is when it becomes a real problem. Now we're going to get another technical here, so bear with me, but there is another molecule that is very important and equally important as oxygen. And this other molecule is called carbon dioxide, or CO2. This CO2 is going to be what determines if that hemoglobin drops off that oxygen to your cells or it stays attached and your cells start to starve. Basically, if you have enough carbon dioxide, then this hemoglobin is going to be more likely to drop off this oxygen to all of your cells. But at the same time, if your carbon dioxide levels are too low, then your hemoglobin is not going to be able to drop off this oxygen. And this is called the Bohr effect. If you have higher levels of carbon dioxide, your hemoglobin is going to get rid of this oxygen and you're going to get more oxygen going to your cells. If you have low levels of carbon dioxide, then your cells are going to starve. So a lot of people think that carbon dioxide is a waste product and we need to get rid of as much carbon dioxide as possible because it's a toxic waste and we need to get rid of it from our body. But I get so mad when I hear that because most people do not understand how important carbon dioxide is and how most people have too low levels of carbon dioxide and they actually need to increase their carbon dioxide levels. Because what happens is when you breathe too quickly and you breathe too excessively, in other words, the more that you breathe, the less carbon dioxide that you have. Because anytime that you breathe, you intake oxygen, but you exhale carbon dioxide. Now, the problem is we don't get any carbon dioxide from the air around us. We only get carbon dioxide from our metabolism. So the only way to increase your carbon dioxide levels will be to hold your breath because your metabolism will go on and you're not going to be exhaling carbon dioxide. So it'll start building up in your body. But since so many people are breathing way more than their body needs, so many people are getting rid of too much of this carbon dioxide. And this is what can cause you to feel breathless because you may feel like you don't have enough oxygen, but really you have more than enough oxygen. The issue is you're not getting oxygen going to your cells. So taking these big breaths through your mouth, huffing and puffing to try to get more oxygen is just doing more harm than good. So just to give a little more detail on how your breathing actually works. Your brainstem is what triggers you to take the next breath. So you have this trigger in your brainstem, and it determines if you're going to take your next breath depending on your carbon dioxide levels. So your brainstem will monitor your CO2 levels, and when your CO2 levels build up to a certain point, then it'll trigger you to take a next breath. And this will just happen without you even realizing it. You can be sleeping, you can be relaxing, you can just be watching TV, and this is what'll trigger you to take your next breath. But the problem is when people start breathing more and more, and they start breathing quicker and quicker and more excessively than they need to, then this brainstem trigger will start to change. It'll start to sense that, hey, my CO2 levels haven't gotten as high as they're supposed to be. Instead, they're kind of a little bit lower. So maybe we're going to change our trigger, and anytime it builds up here instead of up here, we're going to take our next breath. So now, instead of waiting for your CO2 levels to build up to where it's supposed to be, it's going to just change and say, hey, I'm going to settle for it being down here, and it's okay if we take the next breath. So this is what causes you to start breathing quicker and quicker. So it basically turns into a perpetual cycle where you start breathing too excessively. You start getting rid of too much CO2. Then your brainstem realizes that your CO2 levels are lower than what they're supposed to be. So then it tells you to start breathing even more faster. So this is what turns you into a chronic overbreather and makes you start breathing quicker and quicker, and actually even turns you into a mouth breather. Now, let's say that you are a nose breather and you normally do not breathe that much. You are breathing how much your body is supposed to be breathing. You're breathing to meet your metabolic needs. But instead, for one day, you try to breathe through your mouth, or even 1 hour, you try to just breathe through your mouth and you breathe a little excessively. Well, for that short amount of time, you should be fine. And the reason is that your body has these built-in buffers to kind of correct itself. Because one other thing that your carbon dioxide controls is your blood pH, or in other words, how acidic your blood is. So your pH runs on a scale. It runs between 1 and 14. If something is a pH of 1, that means that it's very acidic. And if something is a pH of 14, that means it's very basic. So something with a lower pH means it's more acidic, and something with a higher pH means it's more basic or less acidic. So the pH in your blood is very important because it has to stay within a really small window. It has to stay within a range of 7.35 to 7.45. If your pH in your blood gets too high or too low, you can die. So this is incredibly important. And this is another reason why CO2 is so important, because this is what regulates that pH. Luckily, your body has these built-in buffers. So if your brain starts to realize that your pH goes too high or too low, it'll actually release these molecules that will control your blood pH. But the problem is, this is only meant to be a temporary solution. So if you breathe through your mouth and you breathe really excessively for a day or a few hours, then yeah, you should be fine, because these buffers will start to kick in and your blood pH will be normal. But if we do not have enough CO2, then we cannot make these buffers and we cannot control our blood pH. Now, if you keep up this bad breathing habit for weeks or months or years, like so many people are doing, then this is going to start to destroy your body, because now you don't have enough CO2 to control your blood pH. And your body has to control this blood pH, otherwise you'll die. So it has to resort to other measures to control your blood pH. So again, this is a condition called hypocapnia. And this is a condition that a lot of people are in that not enough people are talking about. Because now when your body's in this condition, your body's basically fighting for survival mode. It's doing anything possible just to keep you alive. So what does it do? Well, one thing is it starts shrinking your breathing tubes. It starts making it harder to get rid of that CO2 in your body so that it can retain enough CO2 to keep you alive. But at the same time, this makes it harder for you to breathe. So now you're going to be struggling breathing. You're going to be struggling going to the gym and working out. You're going to have trouble sleeping. And basically, you're just going to be miserable. But it's not just your breathing tubes. Pretty much every single tube in your body will start to shrink with too little CO2. And if you don't already know, pretty much every single part of your body is running on tubes. You have your reproductive system, you have your digestive system, you have your circulatory system, every single system in your body is running on these tubes. So now your arteries, your veins, everything will start to constrict. So this will make it so much harder for that oxygen to go to your cells, because now your oxygen has to fight through this smaller window to get to your cells. And in turn, it's gonna make you feel more breathless and feel more like crap. But the good thing is that now you're starting to watch this and now you're starting to understand why you have too little levels of CO2 and why you're feeling breathless in the first place. You can start coming up with ways to fight this and start increasing your CO2 levels and start breathing normally again. So one great resource we have for learning how to breathe properly is modern day hunting tribes. Now this may sound crazy, but these modern day hunting tribes are the closest thing we have to getting to how our ancestors used to breathe. So there is this anthropologist named Wade Davis, and he followed this one hunting tribe in the Amazon. Now, one thing you gotta understand about this guy is he is not just a normal guy. He is also a triathlete, which helped him a lot. I'm gonna get into exactly what he did. So Davis would follow this tribe during their hunts, and their hunts would start early in the morning, and they could take a while. They could even take up to a few days. And he has some very interesting things that he noticed during these runs. So one thing he noticed is this tribe was so in tune with their senses that they could smell the urine of an animal about 40 feet away. And just using that one sense alone, they were able to track down an animal. But this is where it gets really crazy. As soon as they would get the trail of an animal, they would start chasing it. So they would start running. And they would keep running and keep chasing the animal. And obviously the animal would notice that it's getting chased, so it would start to run away. But these guys were really persistent. They would keep chasing the animal for hours and sometimes even days at a time. Yeah, that's crazy, right? They would keep chasing this animal for days. And eventually the animal would pass out from being too exhausted. And these guys would finally get their hunt. Now, luckily, Davis was able to keep pace with these guys because, one, he's a triathlete. But you can imagine for anyone running days at a time, it can be really difficult. And he recounted how difficult it was for him to keep up with this tribe. But this is my favorite part. One thing that he noticed about this tribe is they were breathing through their nose the entire time. So the entire hunt, this entire journey of running at a fast pace and chasing an animal, they were breathing through their nose and not using their mouth. And you may think that this sounds crazy or impossible, but people are doing this. And our ancestors used to do this. And they used to breathe like this for hours, for days at a time while hunting. And they would not use their mouth. Now you may think, like a lot of people do, that breathing through your nose will put you at a disadvantage because it'll be harder to breathe. But really it's the opposite. When you're a mouth breather, and you're breathing through your mouth, that is what's putting you at a disadvantage. And the thing is that breathing through your mouth has become so normal, right? I mean, go to the gym and look around you. How many people do you see breathing through your nose? I dare you to find 5 people. It'll probably take you a while. And I'm talking about people that are actually working out. And the thing is, like I said, this concept of regularly breathing through your mouth is pretty new. Our ancestors never used to breathe like this. Now, some people are quick to say that it's evolution, that, oh, we just evolved to start using our mouth more. That's normal. Well, I hate to disappoint you, but it's not evolution. Our evolution cannot work that quickly. And if you look at the history of anthropology and you look at how our breathing rates have changed, you'll see that our breathing has changed way too quickly for it to be because of evolution. Just to further emphasize this, our breathing really didn't start changing until the last 1,000 years, and really, if you want to look into it, the last 300 years is when it really started changing. But if you look at, let's say, 40,000 years ago, this is where the first Neanderthal man was. Our DNA from that time is 99.7% the same. So in those last 40,000 years, our DNA only changed 0.3%. Now you might think, hey, well, those guys 40,000 years ago, they look way different than I do now. Like their jaws are way bigger and they just look different. So explain that. Well, there's a difference between your genotype and your phenotype. Our genes can be the exact same, but it doesn't mean we're going to look the same. This is where your environment comes in. So if one person is growing up in a forest and one person is growing up in a normal household, and the person in the forest is having a completely different diet, and the person living in the household has a different diet, and they have completely different lifestyles, that's where your phenotype comes in. Because just because you have certain genes, it doesn't mean that they're going to be expressed. Because your environment, the things around you, can change your phenotype. So in other words, your genotype is your actual genes, your actual DNA. That's what you inherit from your parents. but your phenotype is what's actually expressed. So for example, let's say I have these genes and they make up my jaw. So these genes tell me that I'm going to have a jaw here. But my phenotype is what's going to determine how big my jaw actually gets. If I start eating really hard foods and I start using my jaw muscles a lot, then my jaw is going to be more likely to grow and expand. But at the same time, if I start eating really soft foods and I don't use my jaw muscles, then yeah, my jaw is not going to grow as much. Either way, I still have a jaw, but one jaw is bigger than the other. That is the difference between your genotype and your phenotype. And this is what has happened from our ancestors to us now. Our ancestors used to eat harder foods. They used to eat more raw foods, like more raw vegetables, and they used to hunt for their food. They used to train. They used to work out pretty much every single day. And now we've gotten a lot more lazy and we start eating softer foods, and all these things have changed. And this is what's caused those changes in those looks from our ancestors to us now. It's not a change in genes, it's a change in things that we're doing. And in turn, one thing in particular that all of these changes have caused is a change in the way that we're breathing. And all of these changes, especially recently, these recent changes in the last few hundred years that have happened, especially with our diet and us having chronic stress and our lifestyle, etc., all of these things have changed our breathing. And this is why I am so passionate about this. We have so much evidence that using your nose instead of your mouth to breathe will help you in so many ways. Not only will it improve your athletic performance, it'll also improve your overall health. And not enough people are talking about it. And this is one thing that once I realized this, it's really changed my health. And this is why I hope I can spread this message to as many people as possible. So I think the biggest time where your breathing becomes an issue is when you are breathing through your mouth at times of rest. Now, anytime I say that, I always have people yell at me like, hey, Dr. Singh, when do I get a chance to rest? I have 3 kids at home. I have a dog at home. How am I going to rest? Well, when I say rest, I mean not physically exercising. So if you're sitting at home and you're taking care of your kids, or if you're sitting at your office job, that is considered resting, although you may not consider it resting. At all times of rest, you should be breathing through your nose. And this is the first step that so many people can take that's going to help their breathing in so many different ways. And this is also going to help make sure that your body has enough of this CO2 and make sure that you're not breathing too excessively. Now, I know this may be hard for some people, but this is something that our bodies are supposed to do. Our bodies are genetically wired to breathe through our nose and not wired to breathe through our mouth. Our mouths are basically designed as a last resort. And this is why I say this is the first step for everybody. If you're able to breathe less when you're resting or relaxing or not physically exercising, then this is going to put you at a much higher advantage when you actually have to work out, because your body's used to not breathing as excessively. Now, one of the best ways to improve your breathing and quickly improve your athletic performance is to do high altitude training. We've seen so many times where athletes go to these mountains or go train in these higher altitudes to train in these low oxygen conditions, so that when they come back and they have to fight someone or they have to run this race, that they're at a much higher advantage. And at the same time, it's been well documented that people who live in higher altitudes tend to live longer and live healthier than people who live at lower altitudes. Now, it's not feasible for me to tell you to go to Colorado or go to these mountains and go train over there, right? Because not many people can do that. But you don't have to do that. You can actually bring those mountains to your home. There's a way to simulate high altitude training at your house. Now, the main thing that this involves is getting your body comfortable with having less oxygen. Now, you may think I'm crazy for saying that because we need oxygen to survive. But people in higher altitudes literally do this all the time. They're forced to do this, and their body adapts. So one way that their body adapts is by producing more red blood cells. Red blood cells carry this molecule called hemoglobin. And if you remember from what I was talking about earlier, your hemoglobin is what carries your oxygen, and this hemoglobin carries your oxygen to all of your cells. So if you have more red blood cells, that means you're going to have more ability to carry your oxygen. Basically, your oxygen is a passenger, and your red blood cells and your hemoglobin is this train. So you have basically more trains to carry these oxygen molecules. So basically, people who live in higher altitudes, they have more of these trains that can carry more of these oxygen passengers to all of their cells. Or in other words, their oxygen carrying capacity is going to be higher. So one thing that happens when you force your body to have less oxygen is your body will figure out a way to carry more oxygen, because when it senses that less oxygen is getting in from the air around you, then it decides that it has to carry more oxygen to all of your cells so that it can meet its metabolic needs. Now, if you don't remember, this is one thing that was talked about in the Tour de France. And a guy named Lance Armstrong got in trouble for this, and it's called blood doping. So if you don't know what that is, basically, any athlete who has a competition coming up, a few weeks before, they will draw blood from their body. And they'll store it somewhere, and then closer to the competition, like a week or up to 1 day before, they'll put that blood back in their body. What they're doing is basically when they take that blood out, their body will sense that there's less blood and less red blood cells. So their body will naturally start to produce more red blood cells on its own to make up for that loss of blood. But then a week before the competition, they put that same blood back in their body. So now their body has way more red blood cells than it normally does. So now their bodies have this ability to carry more oxygen, and they're going to be at a much higher advantage. And this is why it's illegal. But what if I told you there's a way to do this blood doping at home, but do it in a safe way and do it legally and not use any needles? Well, this is exactly what happens when you do high altitude training. Because like I said, when your body is exposed to lower oxygen conditions, your body will produce more red blood cells. And not only that, your spleen will also play a factor. So your spleen will produce a molecule called erythropoietin, or EPO. EPO will also help produce more red blood cells. So it's kind of a twofold attack when you're exposed to less oxygen. So this is basically doing the same thing that these cyclists or these other athletes got in trouble for, and they were doing very unsafe methods of sticking needles in their arms to do this. But you can naturally do it at home by doing high altitude training. So I don't want to keep boring you. I know you actually want to get into what the exercises are. So I want to start off by telling you what the basics of high altitude training are. So basically what you're doing in high altitude training is you are breathing less than your body feels the need to. So anytime you exercise, your body produces a molecule called CO2 or carbon dioxide, and your body also increases its breathing because it wants more oxygen. But when you breathe less, specifically in these times where you're exercising, now your body is going to get used to a lower concentration of oxygen and also get used to a higher concentration of CO2. Both of these things are going to be equally important in doing this high altitude training. Now, obviously, before you do any exercise that I recommend, make sure you talk to your doctor and see what's safe for you and see if there's any risks specifically for you. Now, one exercise that I think any beginner or any elite athlete can try is basically just getting used to that shortage of oxygen. So the first step is going to be just to relax your body, right? Because anytime you're stiff or you're feeling stressed out, then it's going to make this exercise a lot harder. So make sure you check your body, check your muscles, and see if you can just relax your muscles first. So step 2 is going to be to focus on your breathing. So just spend 1 minute checking how much air you normally inhale and exhale. And once you get a good gauge of how much you're normally breathing, you have to try to reduce it gradually. And gradually reduce that amount of breathing until you start to feel a little air shortage. So once you start to feel like that subtle need of air, or you feel like you wish you could take a deeper breath, that's when you know that it's working. That's when you know that you're starting your high altitude training. Now you want to try to keep this up for 3 to 5 minutes if possible. And to make it a little more difficult, what you can do is you can put a hand over your belly and you can add a little bit of resistance as you're breathing. So anytime you're inhaling, try to push a little bit against your belly to make it even harder to breathe in. Now you don't want to go too far. If your muscles start feeling really tense and this gets really difficult, just abandon the exercise and relax for like 15 to 30 seconds, and then you can go back into it. You don't want to overdo it. Your goal should be to keep this up straight for 3 to 5 minutes, and eventually you may be able to go longer than that. You may be able to even go up to like 10 minutes, but the goal at first should be 3 to 5 minutes, and you may not even be able to get that right away. So just practicing this, all you need to do is 2 sets in a day. And this will be a good way to start your high altitude training. Now, another exercise you can try is to try either walking, running, or jogging while holding your breath. If you're a very fit person, then you can make it more challenging and more extreme. But if you're a couch potato or you're someone that never really works out, then definitely take it lightly. So what you got to do is you do a normal inhale and exhale through your nose. And after your exhale, you either walk or you jog or you run as many paces as you can until you have a strong urge to breathe. And once you have a strong urge to breathe, then you can recover. So you recover only using your nose for 1 minute. So for example, what you can do is you can take a normal inhale, Then go for a jog and run for, let's say, 10 seconds. And after 10 seconds, you have a pretty strong urge to breathe. Then you recover by breathing through your nose, and you do that for 1 minute, and then you repeat this exercise 10 times. So again, normal inhale, exhale, and then you walk or run or jog as much as you can until you have a strong urge to breathe, and then you recover for a minute, and you do this 10 times. Now, this doesn't have to be when you're walking or running. This can also be, for example, when you're cycling or when you're rowing. The times I would not recommend this is when you're swimming, for example, because if something happens and you start feeling lightheaded, you don't want to be in water. Obviously, again, this will vary on your fitness level. If you are an expert swimmer, then you're probably going to be more used to having an air shortage. Now, this is also really good to do for a warm-up. So before you're about to go for a run, you can try doing this warm-up where you hold your breath for like 5 to 10 sets. And what this also does is it gets your body used to having higher levels of CO2 and also lower levels of oxygen. And if you do this for a warm-up, it's really cool because now you're going to be way less out of breath during your run or during whatever workout you're doing. Because if you ever had that feeling where you're going for a run and then in the beginning of the run, you're starting to feel really out of breath right away. And then you're like, oh my God, how am I going to do this 3-mile jog? And then by the end of the run, then you're starting to feel really comfortable and you feel like you can keep going. Well, the reason you felt really breathless in the beginning is because your body wasn't used to that higher level of CO2 you get from working out, and also your body wasn't used to that oxygen shortage. So if you're practicing this warm-up where you're holding your breath before your jog or before your run or before your workout, then your body's going to be used to that higher CO2 level and you're going to be way less likely to be out of breath the whole run. Now, like I said, you can even up the intensity of this and use this technique at home. So for example, some track coaches even use this. So one track coach in particular, he had his athletes who were running 200-meter runs. And this is basically a sprint. So in the last 15 meters of that sprint, he had these athletes hold their breath. And after they were done, they would rest for about 30 seconds, then they would do it again. And then they would rest for 30 seconds, then they would repeat, they'd do the same thing all over again, then they would repeat, and they would do this whole thing about 3 to 4 times, these 200-meter sprints with 15 meters of holding your breath. Now, I don't know about you, but that sounds really difficult. So it really depends on your intensity level and your fitness level, and you can kind of cater these breath holding exercises to whatever works best for you. But regardless, it's all doing the same thing. It's all doing another simulation of high altitude training. Now, another thing you want to try is anytime you're exercising, especially when you're training, you want to use your nose at all times during that exercise. Now, at first, what you might notice is your performance might decline a little bit. Your performance might get a little worse. And the reason is that you might have to actually lower your intensity of your workout so that you can properly breathe through your nose the whole time. But if you keep this up for 2 weeks, this is what the studies have shown, that after 2 weeks of consistently breathing through your nose, that your performance will actually increase. So keeping up this nose breathing and this efficient breathing method will actually pay off after just a couple of weeks. The more you do this oxygen short training and the more you do this nasal breathing and the more you exercise this way, the more your body's going to be used to having less oxygen and the more your body's going to be used to having higher levels of CO2. And also what you can do is you can start holding your breath at other times during the day. Like sometimes I'm reading a book and I just start holding my breath and I do like a few sets while I'm reading. There's just other ways to get your body in this high altitude mode where it's used to having lower levels of oxygen. Now, one important thing that I cannot stress enough is to not overdo it. You don't need to go to the point where you feel like you're out of breath completely and you're dying on the floor. That's not going to help you and that's actually going to make it worse. Just getting a medium to strong urge to breathe during these breath holds is going to do wonders for you, and that's going to be enough to simulate that high altitude training. Now, one of the biggest mistakes people make when they're breathing is they're only using their chest to breathe. And we always hear this, right? We always hear you need to use your diaphragm to breathe. You need to engage your diaphragm. But who really knows how to properly engage your diaphragm? Engaging your diaphragm is one of the most important things to do, whether you're an athlete and trying to improve your performance or whether you're just breathing like a normal person. Anyone who breathes should be engaging their diaphragm, and I'm going to teach you how to properly engage your diaphragm. So a lot of people have what's called a stiff diaphragm, and you get a stiff diaphragm when you don't use it. The longer you go without using something, it tends to get stiff, right? Like if I haven't stretched in a while, then my body starts to get stiff, or if I haven't worked out in a while and I start working out legs, all of a sudden I'm going to feel like my legs get really stiff, right? It's the same thing with your diaphragm. Your diaphragm is another muscle. Now, one mistake people do is they try to breathe right away using their diaphragm as if it's really simple. Well, it might be simple for some people, but not for everyone. If you have a stiff diaphragm, or if you haven't used your diaphragm to breathe in a while, or you never even knew how to use your diaphragm in the first place, the first step is going to be just engaging your diaphragm. You don't need to focus on your breathing at this point. Just focus on how to use your diaphragm. You have to train your body to know what your diaphragm even is and how to use it before you start focusing on your breathing. So there's a couple different ways to actually engage your diaphragm. I'm going to go over both of them. So the first one is you're going to sit up straight. You're going to put one hand over your chest and one hand right above your belly button. So you want to focus on your lower hand, or the hand right above your belly button. And you want to try to push that hand out by using your abdomen. Don't focus on your breathing here. Just try to use your gut to push that hand out. And then after you see your hand come out, then you want to see your hand come in. So try to suck that abdomen back in and keep doing that for a minute or so. And if you keep that up and you get used to that, that's how you're going to start to engage your diaphragm. Now, if this isn't working for you, you can also try doing this laying down. So lay down on your back and bend your knees and do the same thing. Put your hands, one hand over your chest, one hand right above your belly button, and try to stick your gut out and try to stick your abdomen out and try to put it back in. That's going to be basically engaging your diaphragm and teaching your body that it has a muscle right below its lungs. Now, if that's still not working for you, we're going to go over to the next exercise to try to engage your diaphragm. So what you're going to do is you're going to take a normal inhale, exhale through your nose. You're going to go, and then what you're going to do is you're going to try to breathe in and out while you're holding your breath. So it's going to look kind of like this. So you may not see what I'm doing, but as I'm trying to breathe in, since I'm holding my breath, my muscles are going to start contracting. And what you're going to notice is your belly starts to stick out. That is your diaphragm being engaged. Now, you're going to keep this up until you have a kind of strong urge to breathe. Once you have that strong urge to breathe, then you can let go of your nose and you can start recovering and breathing through your nose. Try doing a few sets of this. And the more you do this, the more you're going to kind of see how to engage your diaphragm in the first place. Now, this is all stuff you're doing, like I said, before you even engage your breathing, because the first step is learning how to use your diaphragm in the first place. Once you got there, now we can incorporate our breathing into engaging our diaphragm. So again, you're going to do the same thing. You're going to put one hand over your chest, one hand right above your belly button, and now you're going to breathe in and you're going to see your abdomen move out. You're going to see your abdomen push that hand out. If you're seeing your hand go out and in, then voila, you're using your diaphragm. But you don't want these movements to be super big. You want them to be kind of subtle. So you don't want to really be sticking your hand out and really be sticking your hand in. Just should be kind of going a little bit back and forth. Now you can keep doing this breathing method for a few minutes. And after a few minutes, you should start to kind of get used to engaging your diaphragm. This is how you should be breathing at all times. And this is how you engage your diaphragm. Now, if you want to try a different method, if that one wasn't really working for you, you can try again laying on your back and having your knees bent and put like a book or something not too heavy right above your belly button. And try to see that object rise and go back down with your breathing. And it's going to basically be doing the same thing. Engaging your diaphragm when you're breathing is so important, and there's so many benefits that we get from it. So one thing that a lot of people do not realize that our diaphragm does is our diaphragm helps spread our air throughout our lungs. So in particular, our diaphragm helps spread our carbon dioxide around all of our lungs. And in doing so, it makes our breathing way more efficient. So simply by using your diaphragm, you're going to be breathing way more efficiently, and you're also going to deliver more oxygen to all of your cells, including your brain. Your diaphragm also drives your lymph. So in other words, your diaphragm is important for your lymphatic system. Your lymphatic system is basically this drainage system. So it drains all these fluids back into your bloodstream. And it's really important to drain this because otherwise it can build up in certain areas. So if you do not use your diaphragm, that means you're not going to be draining this lymph. And now you're going to be more likely to have swelling of certain areas. And this is a real big reason why a lot of people have tonsil infections and adenoid infections, or where their tonsils and their adenoids start to swell up, because those are parts of your lymphatic drainage system. And if you're not using your diaphragm to drain this lymph, then areas like that are going to start to swell up. Most Americans will suffer from some sort of stress. And no, I'm not talking about just any type of stress. I'm talking about moderate to high levels of stress. The American Psychological Association did a survey. They found that 3/4 of adults just in the last year alone said that their stress levels have increased. Now, stress can be